So this sense that governance by the governing is so out of whack with the rest of what's expected of any normal workplace, any corporation, any university, any institution, be it public or private, but that somehow standards of behaviour or the way you deal with colleagues is different because it's a political environment, I think is just becoming untenable. And one hopes that the Set the Standard report makes that clear to everybody in the Parliament. Of course, for the same reason as they oppose a federal ICAC, political players never want to have their prerogatives constrained. They always want to test the limits of those things. It's the nature of politics. It's why checks and balances are so critical. But I think the Boris Johnson case is an illustrative warning, if you like, of what can happen to a dominant leader who devalues the currency with their own party, with the Parliament, with the institutions and with the community, who just go, this isn't okay. And I'm inviting people in this series to go, don't think it can't happen here, because these are international, these trends, and it's partly about the permanent campaign, it's partly about win at all costs, but it's actually really about an elite that's becoming so self-referential and out of touch with the expectations of the rest of the community, of business, of every other sector. That's really worrying. So they need to calm down. They need to professionalise, and they need to understand that the jig is up, I think. And that's the fundamental compact with the people who elect you. They elect you to represent them, not, for you to be there for your own purposes. I talk about this shift from institutions as being formative of character, as being formative of our expectations of prime ministers or members of parliament or senators or public servants or whoever, to institutions really becoming performative platforms for individuals who want to do particular things. And I cite a number of examples, including, I think, very senior cabinet ministers who want to pretend that they're outsiders. This is not tenable. They are being allowed to get away with it because we're not paying attention. We're not exercising the tools of active citizenship. But I find that very persuasive, that notion of formative expectations versus this performativity that we see, and I think there's any number of examples of it in the Australian context. We need to nip it in the bud. The Women's March for Justice in March was a very interesting example of the kind of active citizenship that I'm talking about. Many people who hadn't been to a demonstration, I don't know, like myself since 1987, suddenly found myself going, this is not all right. These gender issues in this country are not acceptable. And lots of people turned out, tens of thousands of women around the country of all ages, and lots of male accomplices as well in that kind of process. And really this has been a year where many of the people who have spoken out about threats to democracy or the nature of our politics and the culture around it have themselves been women, whether that's Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins herself, or whether it's some of the press gallery journalists who I think have done a terrific job this year in terms of drawing attention to these extraordinary gender issues. It's not clear that the Prime Minister can overcome his over 60% disapproval rating with women in Australia. So the path to victory is being crafted very carefully through a very specific appeal to a very specific group of male voters in very particular electorates. And the risk for the Women's March and activities like it is that it's shallow activism, right? That it's performative, that people go out and they think the job's done. And we saw this, didn't we, in the wake of the Brexit poll, where kind of young people woke up the next day and said, well, what? I signed all those online petitions. Well, no, you actually have to get involved, and you actually have to find a way to make sure that your activity finds expression at the poll that really counts. And I think that the emergence of community independents, almost all of whom are women, fairly centrist women who once would have been the kinds of candidates that the Liberal Party might have pre-selected, were that a thing, they have emerged. as one group, and they're important. But what's also important is the number of volunteers they've been able to garner. And I think this is a real sleeper issue to watch in the lead up to the poll, is what's the ground game that those independent movements, that other movements that are able to attract women, young people, others who are pretty disaffected with the party system. And that's now showing up as a fairly substantial group of Australians in the polling that's being done. How will that impact on polling day in terms of the peer-to-peer conversations that people have, in terms of the ways that people are trying to engage? And of course, you know, the Palmer United Party and One Nation aren't doing a whole lot to appeal to women, but maybe gender won't be a decisive issue for people in some seats. Maybe in the end, economic concerns or public health or other issues will rate. And of course, the diversity of women and any group of Australians is going to find political expression as well. But there does feel to have been something about 2021 where the gender issue has been profound. And I think they're bringing very interesting pressure to bear in seats that would have been very safe for the government, particularly after particularly after its huge victory in 2019, the big margins that it ended up with in informally marginal seats.